Well, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to our Summer Salon series. My name is Alexander Jarman. I have the really fun job of running the public programs here, and I am one half of the curatorial team that works on Summer Salon series. David White, that runs Adjunct Prop Space in North Park, is our other curator. And it is so amazing to see that we have a problem with seating tonight, and that there's so many of you. So first and foremost, thank you all for coming. I have one major note that I need to put out there for everyone on behalf of our videographers. If you will please turn off your cell phones. It interferes with the recording equipment. So feel free to ignore whatever I say for the next minute if it means you're finding that cell phone in the bottom of your purse or back pocket or wherever. All the way off. Not silent, not vibrate, but all the way off, please. So many months ago, there was a call for proposals for this series, and one of the most interesting, and I should say daring, proposals that we got was from an artist, Andrew Printer, and of course he is on the direct opposite side of the circle from me. And so I think the way we're going to start off is Andrew and I are going to start having a conversation all about this project, and then at the end, we really want to hear from you. So we're going to stop talking at a certain point and invite you to ask questions, and Andrew will facilitate who he would like to speak with at that point. Andrew, I want to just start with the proposal itself. So you gave us this amazing proposal that was grounded in some interesting theory, but also a lot of just personal experience. And so I was wondering if you could talk to us, about that moment in class where you were surrounded by people who did not seem to have the same shared history as you, were not aware of the AIDS epidemic. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that moment, but also just the idea of you having a history that doesn't seem to be this more widely shared history in our society.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I would backstep a little bit, actually, because I applied to grad school with a particular project, which was as a gay man who did not die from AIDS, somebody who lived through all of that, but was still here, and didn't know really how to be, how to look, what to do, and sort of woke up a little bit and was a bit surprised to find that getting married and joining the military and so on were priorities in my community. And I sort of looked around and felt rather isolated. So I applied to grad school with a project about what I should be looking like. And when I got to grad school, I found that I felt like I was a little isolated. No one was interested in what I was interested in. Younger gay people had moved on and thought identity politics was rather passé. The faculty were supportive, but I felt a little bit at a loss. So the class that I took in the third year was video history. And in that class, we looked at the history of video from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and it was all very ordinary. And these were intelligent people. But we got to the era of AIDS, and suddenly they were talking about events and looking at material that I was actually physically at. And suddenly there was a shift between some conceptual understanding of a history of something and being in a class where I was at St. Mark's Square and I was at Grand Central Station. I was in the room. And everyone in the class was younger than me, including the professor. And they were intelligent people and they knew about AIDS and ACT UP, but I felt very secondary to what they were concluding about that whole thing. They were looking at the material, they were reading secondhand reports of it. They heard that I was there, but it was really weird to be in a class where my own history was being decided. And the first layer of sediment, if you like, the first layer of this is what it was and this is what we'll say from this point on. It was very upsetting. I got really upset, like I was being autopsied before I was dead. I was like, shouldn't I be dead now before you guys start doing this? I mean, I feel like I should be out of the room so you can settle matters for me. So that sat with me for a while until your project came along, which was about histories and how they're recorded or not, and the two came together.
when you decided to take on this project, obviously you proposed it as an artist, your personal vision.
Yeah.
But you were very upfront, even in the proposal, that you were going to have to work with not just other artists, but craftsmen, performers, actors, and realized at a certain point that this very personal vision of yours was going to be reinterpreted, and there were going to be these multiple versions of the same history sort of within the same piece. And so I'm wondering if you can just talk about sort of that brave moment when you're letting go a little bit of your own artwork.
It didn't feel so brave. It felt actually comfortable, because I think I was going through a little post-MFA reaction to, here I'm making work and let me have a show and come and look at what I've done and aren't I clever and isn't this lovely. And I actually enjoyed the idea of working with other people in a collaboration of some kind.
He was nominated only once.
And so it was very important to me to do something as a community, as a collective of people, even though I knew that I would have to find quilters, dancers, actors, people who I just didn't have any kinds of relationships with. I think the second part of your question, and really this is quite distracting, but this is the point of it, I think, and I was given permission to go off script a little by saying things like that. I mean, are you following everything? I don't know that I am. But in any case, it was kind of interesting to have an idea, have it be accepted, and then give up all control to other people and technology and an institution like a museum and very busy employees of a museum who can't always reply to my questions, and then I have to just sort of guess at what to do, and then I have to sort of rely on tape recordings that don't work and people who don't show up or people who are late, et cetera, and just let it just all be and hope for the best.
And the fact that you're talking about just let it be, I mean, it's not like you just came in and you're like, okay, this is okay just for today. I mean, this was 12 weeks of coming in every week,
yeah.
And trying to figure out how to work with a large group of people, like I said, on your idea.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of the space and the power of art a little bit, in that why is it interesting for you to look at art as this geography, as this space in which we can have an interesting, if not difficult, dialogue about a subject that has traditionally been taboo, and is still not possibly well understood by some audiences.
The subject being what?
The subject being A, the AIDS epidemic, but then B, who gets to represent that history? Who is allowed to speak about that?
Right. The interesting thing is that the thing that was not taboo, the thing that's not taboo, is to talk about AIDS, because it has been packaged. It's been branded in a way. It was something that was horrific. It was something that was discussed, digested. People lived through it. People experienced it. Now it's a part of everyone's history of the 1980s, one way or another. It's just part, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, women's lib, gay rights, AIDS. It's just another throwaway signifier of something. So that wasn't taboo. In fact, this is probably the time when looking back at that era is appropriate. You're not in the thick of it, and nor is everybody dead. You can have a conversation. The bit that was a bit taboo is, I feel like, a bit of an anachronism in my community, because I don't understand gay marriage. I don't understand this complete adoption of a heterosexual model of relationship building. I don't understand about why gay men who survived all this and changed, and women, lesbians too, changed a community completely, and many of them suffer from mental illness and addictions and alcoholism and homelessness, and they're living the consequences of a really brutal time. That was a lot of great relationships that fell apart, and I felt the taboo was touching that, like it was a third rail of some kind. It's like, we're better now, we've moved on, there's Ellen, all of this stuff. So that was the bit that was that was taboo for me, was just leave it alone and let us sort of get married and settle down. So that's where art comes in. My photographs before grad school were of naked men living in domestic spaces in normal heights, and it was called Second Thoughts from Normal Heights. And I just was collapsing the sort of like unbridled sexuality of gay men into these domestic spaces with lovely accoutrements and things around the house and picket fences. But there were naked men doing somersaults in the living room or twisted in knots on the floor. So that's more of the taboo than having a project about AIDS, frankly.
You know, sort of one of the more interesting parts of, I think, this project for the public coming every week. A lot of people did sort of show up and keep tabs on, oh, how are the quilts, you know, progressing this week, is the fact that,
this machine doesn't have any
you know, your creative process was on view.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your studio was transplanted to the museum for, you know, for how many weeks were you here?
It was 11 weeks.
11 weeks.
11 Friday nights.
So, you know, where
Red is
most
so
artists have the
over.
luxury of experimenting, trying whatever they
Red
want in their
is so
studios, because
over.
nobody's ever going to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you guys did
did.
was visible for the public. So I was wondering if you could, A, talk about sort of being on view,
Yeah.
and then the second part, drilling a little bit further, deeper than just that, is what is that like being in the context of a museum space?
I really don't have the money.
Well, the
to
first
spend
part,
on
being on
anything.
view, I loved it, frankly. I mean, I think that goes back to a little bit of a disillusion of just being this, you know, genius artist in a studio, you know, chipping away at something and then producing it, showing it to the world. I had a bit of a distaste for that. So doing something in the museum with people who, on the one hand, were very skilled quilters and had, you know, a great background in that, and also people who were novices, all doing it together, all doing it at the same time, all doing it in public, inviting the conversations with visitors to the museum, inviting people to do their own little panels and squares. That felt really better, more comfortable in a way. So I enjoyed being in the museum. I think the second part, though, the part about a museum and having that being the space, I didn't think about it much. I mean, I just saw an artistic post-MFA opportunity where I saw one. But I have a feeling it was really important for the people on my group of quilters, the people who had made panels for the Names Project, people who had made panels for people who had died. When I'm guessing, but I think that by inviting them to be part of a project that was at a major museum in the city where they live, it was a really validating gesture. It was a really, and I'm speaking for people I don't really know, but I get the impression that doing it here, rather than the Gay and Lesbian Center, rather than the neighborhood church, meant that this history, these stories, were as valid as any other in the museum, that place that's meant to show and share the interests of the whole city. So I think that's why, you know, even though it was a little bit of an effort to find volunteers to spend 11 Friday nights here instead of happy hour, I think that there was some real comfort or some, I don't know, an embrace by this institution to play a part, to be here, to get it right, get it wrong, make it look great, make it look whatever it is. So being in a museum was important, more important than I thought, actually.
So my last question for you before we open it up
Yeah.
to questions is, I mean, we just had a great moment on the front steps a little while ago.
Yeah.
Where is this line of investigation leading? What's this making you think the next part of the project might be?
Well, it's given me a lot of clarity. I said that to David, who co-curated this with you, is that I mean, I made 2 documentaries back after undergrad school, one about immigration, prostitution, one about AIDS. And they were very collaborative. And then a chunk of time passed, and I went to school as a photographer, just me behind my camera. But I really like this collaborative process and simultaneity, multiple things happening at the same time that are all equally valid and equally interesting, and where everything is sort of like loose and messy, but it's also vivid, I think, in a certain way, and there's a quilt that comes out of it and something that will disappear that comes out of it. So my next project is on the one hand, is a series of photos that start as like street photography, photojournalism that I paint and then rephotograph and then collage, and they're like flat work. But what I'm excited about is something I want to do, hopefully, with children, called Morning Stories, where I start interviewing children as early as they can be verbal, to have them tell me stories, and then take those really rough-shaped ideas of stories up to the next age of children to shape them into comic book, and then take that up to the next age of children, maybe early 11 or 12, to perform plays, to create plays. So starting with something that's like raw material and shaping it up to around the age of 12 as a production, and just see what kinds of stories emerge. And that's a project I'm working on, and cross-border, maybe originating in Tijuana and coming over here. So this simultaneity is kind of interesting to me, and what can emerge from that.
Will become.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, that sounds like longer than a 12-week project, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to open it up to some questions from the audience, and you can just raise your hand. Andrew will choose you.
Does anyone have any questions? I'm not sure if anyone does. No questions.
I do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Was there anything about the finished quilts that surprised you?
I think, to be honest, the thing that surprised me most was my ability to rein in my micromanaging, controlling nature and not have my group of quilters do what I wanted. So the surprise was that I was able to sort of let it go and let it be what it became. So I'm thinking quilt, something cozy that Grandma made, and I'm going to get snug. I'm not thinking of disco balls and things like that. So it surprised me that I was able to let go. I was also surprised at how freeing it became, that one particular quilt. Yeah, that comes to mind. Is there another question? Yeah.
Sorry, I haven't been over to the quilts yet, so a little bit out of context here. I was wondering how your speech tonight, your lecture, your discussion was influenced by the space. I couldn't see your eyes, but I'm just curious how you used your eyes in everything you talked today.
Well, I knew from the very beginning my proposal was to have two quilt groups make separate quilts with the only remit being make a quilt that represents your 1980s. And I should use this opportunity to thank, on the one hand, the set of people who I worked with for 11 weeks, and all of them who I were either familiar with, worked on, or knew about the Names Project AIDS quilt. And on the other hand, Ann Olsen and a set of volunteers, many of whom I didn't meet, but many of whom were here every Friday making their version of the 1980s. Theirs is the quilt that touches on Reagan and Thatcher and Mount St. Helena's and the Berlin Wall. In terms of this, the space didn't influence me at all, but I had to put a lot of brain power into listening to his questions and not thinking about the other things going on. But that's kind of like how history is, in a way. Some things will be forgotten, not heard, remembered more than others, so I was just straining to listen. But I had that plan all along. 11 weeks of quilting followed by a final performance that would be based on all the audio recordings of all 11 weeks. Yeah.
Hi, Andrew. I'm wondering, why did we have these, called distractions from your talk and answering the question? This obviously was planned. Now, why did you do it that way? Did it have to do with the fact that we have so many distractions in life from the themes that we should be addressing, or what was the motive in doing this?
For me, it was that the project was inspired by my experience in a class, which was discussing and dissecting an experience that I lived, then it was done in an institution and in a very solemn way and in a very intelligent way. And with this one, I had that experience, but a bunch of us had an experience of 11 weeks making quilts and talking and having conversations and sharing information and how do you do that stitch, and oh, did you go to Fire Island, and oh, can you help me find some red fabric? And they were all recorded, and I knew that we might have a Q&A at the end, and I didn't want that Q&A to only be a representative of an institution with a certain agenda asking me questions as though I'm a fixed and singular authority on what happened, and answering them, and you all going, and I'm some expert, and he's some expert, and that's all there is to it. I wanted to give those recordings to people and artists who I have no knowledge of their way of interpreting material, and just say, listen to this stuff, do what you like with it, take what you want from it, and share that at the same time, not in another place or in another way. So it's almost as if all the people in those quilts were not on that tapestry, but were sort of singing and dancing and moving and reciting at the same time as looking at the quilt. So I wanted to have all three sets planes happening simultaneously. Some people here, I imagine, might have heard everything I said, but I imagine most of you will have drifted in and out of what I said, seen some of this, looked at the sweat on their faces, heard these people, and I heard some very bizarre things. And that will be what you take away from this. Something perhaps a little personal, something a bit intelligent, something visceral, kinetic, funny, and all of it.
I thought it might have been, when we have important issues to focus on, and then we have all this other stuff, sometimes this other stuff, much ado about nothing, just takes over.
And that's fine if that's an interpretation that seems
Remodeling your
valid.
bathroom.
Yeah.
and what are they doing over here? And meanwhile, I really wanted to focus on you, but I was getting really distracted.
Right. So it was meant to be a sort of a emblematic, a metaphor of some kind, or representative of some kind of the way in which we just absorb and remember things. Yeah.
So I want to remind everyone in this fabulous institution of encyclopedic art, mostly with dead artists, that you have a living artist right over here, and to come up and talk to all these performers. And I think we owe them a very large round of applause.
I also have one more comment. I'm David White. I'm the co-curator of the Salon series. But I also would like to say that we owe Alexander Jarman a big round of applause for initiating the Summer Salon series 3 years ago. And that's what a great program that this has been over the last 2 years. And I'm very grateful myself to be included in this. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for the city of San Diego to have this kind of forum that we can have these kind of dialogues. Thank you, Alexander.
Gets up, I did just in the spirit of talk to the living artists. Could the 4 actors stand up just so everyone can I think everyone saw the 2 dancers. Everyone's name, but I know that I would choke on it because I'm building information. But also the quilters.